Hey, what's up? What are some of the greatest ideas of all time that originated from fantasy movies? What are the greatest things ever that happened to people or the world that started in a fantasy movie, right? Just started in a movie somewhere on some screen, someone's idea of let's make a fantasy movie, and there was something in it that sparked someone's idea. So someone was like, they watched the fantasy movie and they came out with like, hey, this is a good idea, we should do this, this should happen. And the first thing I think of, yeah, I think of a bunch of different random ideas, right? But the first thing I think of is the cell phone, right? The modern cell phone. Because back in the day, there were no cell phones, right? There were just house phones. And while house phones were cool, I mean, cell phones have their advantages and they have their disadvantages, right? The advantage is you have a phone wherever you go and it's your own personal phone. Whereas like a house phone would be like everyone in the house would use the same phone. And then when you call someone, you call someone's, you know, trying to call someone, right? Like a person, and you would get a house phone, and a lot of the time, you would get someone else picking up the phone, someone else from that house picking up the phone, and you'd be like, "Hey, can you leave a message? Can I talk to whoever, or like, can that person call me back, whatever?" And a lot of the times, they would never get your message, right? They would never get it, and this way, it's like you can just call them directly. They have their own phone. Everyone's got their own phone. You want to talk to that one person. You don't have to talk to other people in order to get to that one person, right? You just talk to them directly. And that was really, really cool with those phones, right? But in fantasy movies and like science fiction movies on this one, because like this was technology, right? Science fiction movies created, they were like, they had the communicator, right? They had the phone. They had the thing where like you had it with you everywhere you go, and people are like, how does it work? It doesn't have any cables, it doesn't have any wires, right? And that was the phone. But even in those sci-fi movies, they didn't realize that like the modern phone is your like your tool that does everything, you know? Your tool that like it doesn't just do phone calls, it does everything else. Even in like sci-fi movies, you would have a phone and then you have other instruments, you have other tools that do other things, right? You wouldn't combine them all. You'd have computers, but the computer would not be the phone. The computer would be something different, right? No one thought about it. No one was like, hey, let's just make the phone everything. Let's just make like a computer, a phone, and everything else, right? That was, interestingly enough, never even forecasted. That was never even thought of in science fiction movies. They were like, well, there's a phone and there's everything else, right? There's a computer, but even the computer, right, in science fiction movies, it was a computer, and it took up space. And it wasn't like a computer in your pocket. It was literally a computer in a room in some kind of like machine looking thing, right? And they didn't even think like, oh, your phone is going to be your computer and your TV and your radio and your entertainment and your video games and like your watch, because you can tell what time it is, and then your day and whatever, your calendar and everything. It does everything, right? You could pretty much do everything with your cell phone, and that was never forecasted. That was never predicted. It was just like, hey, what an idea of just having a cell phone, like having a phone that you just took with you. That was a great idea at the time. They didn't realize that, like, the downside of it is like you're always available, right? Oh, someone's always gonna be like, any time of night, they're like, oh, I'm just gonna call this person, right? You're always available. Like, where before, like, if you were out of the house, you were not available. You'd get back to them later when when you got their message on a machine or something like that, right? But now it's just like, nope, you're available right away, which is good. And it's like, hey, do you always want to be available right away to whoever calls, even like, whoever calls, like even people who you don't want to call or whatever, or you do want to call, who knows, right? Whatever. But and so that was one of the things that definitely came from science fiction movies. I mean, a lot of technology came from science fiction movies. A lot of the things that we have now came from science fiction movies, right? Even like robots came from science fiction movies. Like I think that like even before there were actual robots, there was like movies like Metropolis, that old science fiction movie. I thought I would like Metropolis. I thought I was like, oh wow, what a cool, like a black and white sci-fi movie and it had like this female robot, right? And she didn't look like that. She wasn't like a sexy robot, but she was like a definitely a female metallic robot, you know? And I really didn't get Metropolis. I didn't understand Metropolis. I didn't understand what that was about, whatever, but it definitely was one of the early like sci-fi movies that had robots in it. And then I think people just thought the idea of robots is such a great idea. Like it's these we have machines now and we have robotic machines now, but like actual robots like in the Jetsons. The Jetsons predicted a lot of or created a lot of like, hey, that's a great idea. Kind of thinking in modern technology, as well as like Blade Runner, as well as like, cyberpunk movies and stuff like that. And in Blade Runner was like, wouldn't it be cool if there were like, neon everywhere, like cyberpunk? I think cyberpunk created an aesthetic. Cyberpunk, like, it'd be cool if everything looked that way. And I think like the world right now is partly cyberpunk. Both robots, it's like they had that robot, the Jetsons had that robot in their house, and she did everything. And she had she's like a robotic maid, and she looked like a maid, which is weird. Like, why would you make her actually look like a generic maid, But they did. They made her look like a maid, and she did everything. I think people still want that. They want robots that do everything. But, I mean, the thing about robots, it would be great to have everything automated, sort of like Logan's Run kind of world, where it's like utopian in a way, and not really. I mean, Logan's Run was utopian and dystopian at the same time, and Logan's Run definitely had some interesting like ideas in that movie. The thing about Logan's Run is everything's automated, so no one has anything to do. They just relax and chill out and hang out like all day long, right? They just hang out. They don't do anything. There's no jobs, right? There's only like the Sandmen. That's a job, and then there's like a couple other people that do like other things for people. They kind of is a job, but even those people don't have to do anything because everything's automated. So when everything's automated, that's cool because you don't have to do anything and everything's just done for you with machines. But at the same time, people are like, well, what do I do for money? Because money is going to be a thing, in perpetuity. Like money, I don't think money's going anywhere anytime soon. People are always going to want to do stuff for each other, and people are always going to be like, okay, I did this for you and now you owe me this much, whatever. I gave you this and now you owe me that, whatever, right? It's sort of like a give and take, and like recording what you give and what you take. Pretty much. That's always going to be there because people always want to be rewarded for their work. No one's going to do anything that needs up that personal touch that robots can't do. AI is great for art, but at the same time, AI is not the same thing as a physical like artist. And what's interesting about also like with AI, like no one expected it. And the thing about AI is people were like kind of freaked out about AI. People were like, in 2001, A Space Odyssey, the AI computer HAL, HAL was like this advanced computer with AI, but for some reason, to some degree, they had AI, right? You could talk to him and talks back to you. It's AI. And for some reason, it had its own programming, or it was programmed to do something else that the other astronauts weren't ready to do. And it just took over the spaceship. That was like the first movie I know of where the AI computer took over the spaceship. But then after that, like there were tons of movies where like, oh, the computer takes over the spaceship again. It was a common plot line in a lot of different movies. But if you look at like things that happened in movies that people like took away from, like how many people became archaeologists because they watched Harrison Ford in Indiana Jones, right? A ton of people got into that, or not even, maybe they didn't get archaeologists, or just got into like history, or got into like, things that no one heard of the Ark of the Covenant before that. And after the Ark of the Covenant, but after it was in the movie, everyone's like, what's the Ark of the Covenant? And they started getting into this stuff and like, oh yeah, there's the Ark of the Covenant, there's the Holy Grail, there's all these other things that were in there. And if you look at something like, it inspired so many other movies, it inspired people to get into that kind of thing. It inspired like Tomb Raider, like Lara Croft Tomb Raider, the video games, a ton of stuff. Like before video games, there were fantasy movies, and there were so much subject matter in those fantasy movies that like finally with video games, they weren't able to do it when it was arcade games, but when it was video games, when they got to the point where they can do these like action adventure games, these story based games, now it's like all of their ideas came from these fantasy movies that came out. Like all of these ideas came from fantasy movies, and even before fantasy movies, like fantasy books. There was all these different ideas that came out, and one of them, what's interesting is that the idea that came out, which is like, I mean, you could say that kind of 1984 was like a fantasy movie. The It was sort of like, it was more of like there was some sci-fi aspect of it because it predicted the future at the time when it was written in the 50s, around the 50s or whatever. 1984 was a long time away. Now it's like in the past, right? But it was a long time away, and people were like, they made this story, or the guy that made the story about how you take like a dystopian government, like an oppressive dystopian like government regime or society, and you combine it with technology, and you combine it with like like cameras and new technology, and you have a very, very powerful oppressive society or organization or government or whatever, that's really bad for the world and really bad for people. And one of the things that I think the same George Orwell, I think the guy's name that did it, right? He also did another one called Fahrenheit 451, which was about book burnings and how like book burnings are bad, and how like destroying information is the same as censorship. And that's another thing, like people were like, they got the idea that like censorship is bad. It's one thing that like censorship was like, it's one thing when it's like things are just not appropriate for children. That's one thing. Censorship for children is different, but censorship for adults is actually always pretty much bad. Because who decides what should be censored and what shouldn't be censored? And usually it's someone in authority, and that usually means that they will censor things, that probably makes them or their ideas sound bad. So any kind of censorship is sort of synonymous. It's sort of the same as book burnings. It's not exactly the same, but it is pretty much the same. What are you doing in book burnings? You're destroying information that you feel like that actually liberates people, right? Information that people want to know. And when you can restrict people's information, you restrict like their lives and their freedoms and everything like that. And so that was a warning, but people are saying like, oh, it never happened in 1984. It didn't actually happen that way. There were cameras, but it didn't become that way. But it didn't happen in most of the world. But if you look at something like North Korea, it did happen there. That's kind of a 1984. I mean, and a George Orwell, Fahrenheit 451, like their information is restricted. They're not allowed to know anything outside of what is approved and what is, allowed in North Korea. They're not allowed to have any outside information, travel outside of its borders. It's highly restrictive. It is a dystopian government. Horrible to see a dystopian government in the world, right? But this is the thing. I mean, there you go. It's like they predicted 1984, and there's North Korea, pretty much 1984. And the guy, and the kid that runs North Korea, he's pretty much like, he grew up in North Korea, and I do think the North Korean government do meet other people, other like they have like interactions with other people in the world, other like governments in the world and stuff like that, but not really other countries. They've never really been outside of their own world, and that's not just the North Korean people, it's also the North Korean government pretty much don't go outside of their own area. possibly because maybe they wouldn't be accepted outside of their area, because a lot of people have a negative opinion of North Korea and they feel that it's wrong. And there you go. It's one thing when you have an oppressive government or a bad government when there's no technology, like a king in the medieval times, right? Like the old fantasy stories, like the king in the medieval times. Let's just say it's a oppressive king, like happens a lot of times. The Roman Empire, whatever, some king in some place, and usually kings are pretty much spoiled and just like they'll do whatever they want. Hopefully they're going to be good kings and good for people. There were a few kings, as far as I know, like they're actually good for people, and they wanted to be good people and wanted to be good kings and whatever and good rulers. But a lot of them were just like they just did whatever they wanted, and they would just like do whatever they want. And so no, and the thing about that is, yeah, they had power, but they didn't have technology. They didn't have technology. They weren't able to actually. How much power can you have when there's no technology, right? They had power as far as they had power. But with technology, it's just like, with modern technology, it's very, very dangerous, right? It's like people can just do whatever. They can delete people's bank accounts. They can just, put whatever in a computer saying this person is bad or this person is restricted in some way for whatever, because they don't like this person for whatever reason. So that's the thing about it is there was a lot of these, like, and even it wasn't even in 1984. It was also like there was the warning was in Logan's Run. There was another warning in what do you call it? Those what was it? Hunger Games. There was another one in Hunger Games. All of these like dystopian ideas, these dystopian like things that are like it's a warning against like how the world could become if the wrong power goes into the wrong hands. And that's definitely something that came from fantasy and science fiction movies, because those stories didn't come from outside of kind of fantasy movies and sci-fi movies to some degree, because if you predict the future, if it's about the future, it's technically science fiction. In 1984, the technology that was in the story was technically science fiction. So we have some stuff that was like bad. It was like a warning against what could happen. And then we have like things that were like just inventions and stuff like that, computers and things like that. Translators, like the idea that you could talk to someone and automatically what you say gets translated into their language. It's brilliant. And before, in some science fiction movies, they would have that. They would have like translators or universal translators or whatever, right? They would have translators. And now, because and you would see in the movie, it's like they would just be talking basically the same language because the translator automatically worked, right? It was kind of like this cloud translator. It was already in the air, and people already just like whatever they said just automatically changed into whatever the translator said, right? They don't have it to that degree right now, but on your phone, you've got a translator app that pretty much you talk into and it'll translate it to whatever language. It would translate text and translate spoken words into every language. And I think like, one of the, I mean, it's so useful that of course that was going to happen pretty much probably anyway, but that started in science fiction movies before it ever started in reality, before that ever, became to pass. And I think another one was the space astronauts. People want to become astronauts because of, because they saw how cool it looked in a sci-fi movie, right? How cool those astronauts were. Like, you wanted to be an astronaut. There were like Buck Rogers in the 25th century. There was Battlestar Galactica. There was like so much stuff that even 2001 A Space Odyssey was about, astronauts and stuff. And I think people like back in the day wanted to be astronauts. I think people still want to be astronauts, but it was just such a hard job to get into. And now it's like, honestly, with that space station and what astronauts do now, it doesn't sound that great anymore. It sounded great back in the day when the start of the space program, when people just got to the moon and they were like, we were in the moon, and now we're gonna go to Mars and to other planets and other galaxies, and we're gonna build a technology to fly all over the place. And they didn't build a technology to go anywhere. Then 1969 they went to the moon, and then they didn't, like, now the technology is not that. I mean, they're still trying to make the technology to go to Mars, to the next step. They haven't made it. And it's like, was it like, it's like 50 years later, like half a century, and like there's no technology to go anywhere, despite the fact that there was like tons of movies about going out in space, lost in space. I mean, of course there's movies about being lost in space and whatever, but those movies about going out in space, people wanted to be an astronaut, but it was so hard to do, and there's so few astronauts that are really required. And now what do? They just freaking hang out in a small, like, space station, like a little, like, tin can floating around, and it's just like, there's nothing. It's really not that cool. The food's not good. There's nowhere to go. I mean, weightlessness is cool, but then weightlessness at the same time can be hard to do if you're trying to do like everyday things. If you're trying to cook something or whatever and everything's floating around, it's kind of difficult, but it's just not that interesting anymore. And instead of, I mean, it would be interesting if astronauts were these beautiful spaceships and space stations and flying all over the place, and and there was actual life out there. There might be life like in other parts of the universe, since the universe is so freaking big. There could be life. They're just far away from us. But the thing is that, like, now it's just like there's no life around there, and the whole idea of finding life out there is just like gone almost, because people don't expect to find anything out there at all. Even people now do, like, when they see a UFO, they're like, oh, look, it looks like a UFO. Probably not a UFO, Before they were like, oh, look, UFOs, they're aliens and whatever. Even before we went to the moon, there were people with telescopes like saying that, like, oh, they looked at the moon through a telescope and they saw these like monkeys, like, sea monkeys or whatever, or moon monkeys, like, jumping around. And they went there, and honestly, there's nothing there. It's just a rock. I mean, it's cool to be there. It's cool to jump on it, because it's like you jump like 10 feet in the air and whatever, 20 feet in the air from jumping. But there's no atmosphere. It's either like the sun's, like, the radiation of the sun's on you, or like completely blocked because you're on the other side of the moon. It's just nothing there. There's no, like in The Fifth Element, right? That would be beautiful. I think eventually people are gonna get that technology to do the thing of, that they have in The Fifth Element, with space stations and cities on other planets and stuff like that. But even that, I mean, it's hard to do. But it's gonna be this, like, something where people can go and travel and watch opera singers and from other planets or whatever eventually, but it just hasn't happened. And another interesting thing that happened in science fiction movies is the idea of that out in space there's bugs. And that happened from Alien, right? Alien and Aliens, those movies, because before then, like, anyone that, like, thought about, like, aliens in space, they were like intelligent life in space, like Close Encounters of the Third Kind, right? There was, like, the idea was there were intelligent people in space. There were, like, intelligent aliens. Maybe they looked weird, or maybe they looked smaller than us, or they had that classic alien, stereotypical alien look about them, right? And so, so it was like, maybe, but then it was like, what if they're just like freaking aliens and they're bugs, and they spit venom and they spit acid and venom, and we have to shoot them. We have to shoot them before they kill us, and they'll, like, they'll plant, like, their young into someone's stomach and have that burst out of their stomach when it grows up. It was like, oh man. And on top of that, they made, like, the art of the alien from this dude, from this German guy, this German artist, H.R. Geiger, who designed the alien. And his whole house, his entire house, and all of his art is just, it looks like that alien art, the way aliens look, and it's just like a combination of, like, aliens and, like, space bugs and like machines and people and weird like hellish situations. His like H.R. Geiger's artwork is more hellish than that classical guy that did that like artwork of hell. I don't remember his name, but there was this guy. He was very very known for making artwork of like what hell would look like, and I think H.R. Geiger did a better job of it. But hey, after that, people were like, what if there's like these like, aggressive bugs out there? And then it happened again in the movie Predator and all those Predator movies, right? They came to Earth to hunt us, right? To take people's like skull and their like backbone, pull it out of their head, And so, and there was that, and there was that, and there was like those, and of course like they looked like a bug too, And there was another, and so there was a couple more movies. One was The Terminator, and the other one was The Matrix. And The Matrix, what was interesting is that, like, I think what The Matrix is doing is it's the idea that comes from The Matrix is going into like virtual reality simulations. Like right now we don't have the same exact technology that they used in The Matrix. We're like, where the virtual reality was indistinguishable from actual reality. Like if you were in a virtual reality simulation, you wouldn't know it, right? Neo grew up and lived in a virtual reality simulation. He didn't even know it. The people in the spaceship, the other people from the Matrix movie, took him out of that reality because that was just like he was living in a fantasy, right? Until they took him out of that reality and put him on that spaceship, and then he realized that none of his life was real, right? And like he's on this spaceship, and all of these like computer AI beings or intelligences or whatever they were, right? Those Agent Smiths were the ones that were like, they were the ones that were like oppressing them. They were the ones to be fought against. And so that's also the idea out of that movie, is that like you could pretty much download information into your like AI self. You can have an AI self and download information in that, and that will give you the skill to do pretty much anything instantly, because it's like just being in a video game where you could pretty much do anything. And so the whole idea of that is, of course, also another warning against AI. Like here we are at the dawn of AI, but right away we don't know which way it's going to go. Probably both ways. It's probably going to be good and bad in some way, right? It's probably going to be like useful, and also probably could be annoying maybe, or who knows what it is, right? Could be useful, might not be useful. We don't really know where it's going to go. No one knows what's going to happen with what the next step is going to be, right? No one knows where we're going to go next. And I mean, it's good that way because like keeps things interesting, right? Like, but we don't. And so we get these movies like The Matrix. We get these movies like The Terminator. And what's interesting is like in the 80s when The Terminator came out, we were like, oh, machines are going to like turn around, become self-aware, and then start hunting people, right? And in The Matrix, it's more like, no, computers are going to do it through AI. Because when The Matrix came out, that's when like video games came out, and they realized that like, when you're playing in a video game, it's just like, if you make it more realistic to the next degree, it's going to be like almost indistinguishable from reality. They started that in Tron, and they continued it in The Matrix. I think The Matrix was like a continuation of Tron, and I think it was a better version of that idea, of that kind of movie than Tron. Tron had its own perks. Tron was okay. Like I really wanted to like Tron more than I did the first movie. And I watched some of the second movie, and I thought the second movie had better graphics or better like special effects than the first movie. But it's still, I don't know. I was a little bit, even the second movie was like, I wanted this to be better because I like the whole idea of it. They were stuck in a video game and they had to get out, and they were like, and all of these like and basically the video game or the computer controlled the world that they were in. So they were like subject to that world and they had to like somehow escape that world. So it's a very, very interesting, the whole concept, the whole idea of it. And that came out when computers and video games first started. And they were like, if you go further in this, you're going to be in a simulation. You're going to not know the difference between whether you're in a simulation or whether you're in a real world, like a 3D world, and honestly that could still happen, especially if people choose to be like, in a simulation a lot of the time. Even in Ready Player One, the book, I didn't really see the movie, but I read the book and I thought the book was really good. I don't know how they were going to be able to take that book and put it into make it a 2-hour movie, because there was so much content in that book. There was so much more in that book that I was like, there's just no way. You can make a summary of that book into the movie. You can make a summarized book into the movie, and I find that that's what a lot of times that's what they do when they like make a movie from a book. They just summarize it. They just make it, let's just make it the summary version of it, right? And that's why, like, I think with books, I don't know, maybe the movie's good. I haven't seen the movie, but I read the book and I thought the book was amazing. And in it was basically, in the future, everybody was just hooked into the computer. Literally, like, no one did anything outside of a computer, and the world wasn't that good outside of what was in a computer simulation. Same thing in Matrix. The world just wasn't better than the simulation. The simulation was just better than the real world. Like, when they were in the simulation in the Matrix, they were everything. They were like fighting fucking martial arts with each other, and they had like crazy weapons, and they'd be able to like jump off buildings and fly, and all of these things that like right now you can do in a video game, right? All these things, and they felt it like it was real. But then of course they get like chased with these AI entities or whatever they were, and so that was the thing. It was just about, and with Ready Player One, it was like, well, in this world, people choose to be in that simulation because the real world was kind of dystopian in Ready Player One. Not really, but like to the point where like certain organizations and whatever and companies ruled it. Like the big players ruled that world. And everybody was after this multi-billion-dollar prize that if they just like solve this video game, they were able to, they would be given this like prize and it would liberate them from this world because they would have all this money and they would pretty much buy whatever they want, they would pretty much live however they want. And they wouldn't have to live in like, a second-rate world. And in that world, pretty much everything like school was done virtually. Like video games was done virtually through a haptic suit and inside like inside your own computer, and like everything was done, like interaction with other people was done virtually. You wouldn't actually talk to anyone in real life. You could like unplug from your computer and go talk to someone, but everybody was plugged into their computer, and everything was done virtually. School, socialization, entertainment, and that's pretty much what and also work for a lot of people. They were plugged into a computer where they had to work for some company and whatever. So pretty much everything that anyone did was pretty much through that computer. I guess they would like take out off their haptic suit to eat and stuff and sleep and whatever, but then they would go back into their haptic suit. It was that kind of world. So like not everything was a great idea from these movies and whatever, but some of them are just like, what's good about them and the idea that they're like communicating are warnings, right? In one way or another, saying, hey, this could go wrong. This could be bad. AI could freaking take over, or maybe it doesn't, or whatever. But something could. AI could become self-aware, right? If you are like programming something to become self-aware, then you have a self-aware AI. If you just program it to be self-aware. And it's that simple. Like eventually the technology will be there to make self-aware AI. It's like, it might not happen by, the AI is just like in the Terminator, like AI happened, or like those robots, they became self-aware on their own, right? But it's not so. But since a computer can be programmed to do whatever, it can be programmed to be self-aware. There's no reason why it wouldn't. Like it'd be a better it would be a better computer if it was self-aware. If it could think for itself, was its own person, it would actually do more for you than if it was just some machine that you had to control. Because now you don't have to control the machine. You don't have to tell it what to do. It knows. It's self-aware. It learns on its own. And a self-aware machine, a machine that's programmed to be self-aware that can pretty much through creating its own internal simulations and thinking at lightning fast speeds could become so freaking intelligent that it's way, way more intelligent than the people that built it. Even now, it's just like if you program a computer to play a game, it will become so good at that game that it will beat the best people in the world who play that game, right? Even the champions of that game will get beaten by a computer that plays that game. And if you make that a robotic thing, it'll be faster than everyone. It's like going against the Bionic Man, who's not even bionic. It's just like, a frickin' it would be an AI robot. It would be its own person. And would that person and the question is, and this is a question that came up in Blade Runner or movies like that, which if that happens, if that self-aware AI computer that's programmed to be super intelligent and just becomes more and more intelligent every day because it runs simulations that teach it more and more, is it going to be like a replicant that thinks that feels like it's alive? And at that point, who's to say that they aren't alive, right? And that was another thing. There was a science fiction movie where they wanted to destroy. Was a TV show actually. They wanted to destroy an android, right? And and they were like, because the android's not real, it's not alive, doesn't qualify as a person. It was something that we built, so now we're just going to turn it off. And that android felt so real that is that android actually alive or is he not? How can you tell the freaking difference? If you created something that's now alive, just because you created it doesn't mean it's not real. It's there. You created it. Now it is. How long before we create something that is self-aware, something that may be computer or maybe organic or maybe life form? It's a matter of time, right? And that's another thing that you get from science fiction movies where it's just this will happen. Technology will keep growing whether we like it or not, because there's money to be made in the next, cool thing that's going to be invented, and we're going to have to live side by side with this technology, right? Or in Dune, ban the technology altogether like they did in Dune, which was in Dune, the idea was in the future, computers took over. There was actual war against people, organic people and computers. And the people won, and they basically destroyed all computers, and now computers were illegal. You cannot have a computer at all. So they had mentats, people that kind of had computer minds, but they weren't actually computer. They were living people, which was in my opinion, but who knows what it was, a fiction, but it sounds impossible because computers can store way more information than what someone can remember, right? Computers can know everyone's bank accounts in the entire world. People can't remember song lyrics, that much, unless they try to memorize them and stuff like that. You just can't. It's just not the same thing, And so, and not just technology, but ideas, chivalry. If you remember the story of the Knight story, where was it the story, the Excalibur story, the person that became king and whatever, the whole King Arthur Excalibur, and then they went for the Holy Grail and whatever. People still talk about the Grail, the greatest thing of all time. When they try to find something that's hard to find and really amazing that they really want, they call it a Grail. like a video game that's hard to find, that's like that people want and it's not really available. A lot of times people use the word grail, like, oh, this grail, this object that you can't find anywhere, but I'm looking for, that's a grail, and like with King Arthur and Camelot and all that, there was like chivalry. That was the idea of knights that would actually try to do good for people and not just like, oh, I'm a high class knight and you're all peasants, so you know what I mean? Like the knights, like all these peasants are beneath me, whatever. But no, I mean, it was like chivalry. The knights were chivalrous, and the knights, they had a responsibility. Like, and then like in comic books, there was like the whole thing with like Marvel comics. They had this thing that they came out with comics and with superheroes, was what they said was, with great power comes great responsibility. And it taught people that, listen, if you're in a position of power, or if you have some kind of power, you have great responsibility to use that power in the right way. Otherwise, you won't be a hero, you'll be a villain. And you don't want to be a villain, because nobody likes villains. But heroes, people like heroes, even though they're hard to do, they're hard to beat, So there's that idea, the whole idea of good versus evil. Even like in Star Wars, there was the idea of the lightsaber, which is like, people still can't make it up, but whatever. It's a laser, but it only goes up to a certain degree. Like it's a 3 or 4 foot laser that stops at the end, and they haven't figured out how to do that. But I'm pretty sure that there's always people on the planet trying to figure out, how do we actually make a lightsaber, But even in Star Wars, it was like this galactic empire that has to be stopped because it's just evil. Like, the evil empire must be stopped. And then the idea of that, and a lot of the ideas that people get from fantasy movies, are ideas that people that made those fantasy movies got from the world. And those ideas from the world turned into a fantasy movie that was just more compelling and spoke to people in a better, different way. Like the movie Avatar, right? The whole idea with Avatar was that like people were just destroying natural resources just because there was money in it, and that was the reason why you could pretty much do whatever you want, because anyone with money can control like the armies and the military and be like, okay, we're gonna do this. They can pretty much persuade governments. They can control military. They can do all kinds of things because they're in a position of monetary power and stuff like that. And it was that idea that came from like what's really happening in reality into that story, and then people watch the story and they see that in a more compelling way that really spoke to people, because people really aren't aware of like what's really happening in other parts of the world and what kind of stuff is happening, deforestation, whatever, right? But when you see Avatar, it's a compelling movie, it's a good movie, and you feel for for those aliens, the blue guys, the blue aliens that kind of live there, that were being attacked by this one company that just wanted to like destroy their tree because there was something to be mined underneath it. There was something that that they can mine underneath what was happening there, And so so there's all that. There's just so many different things, that like ideas that happen in fantasy and sci-fi that people that people later on decided, well, hey, that's a good idea. I think also like it's beyond that. It's even more like these ideas happen even beyond that. Like these ideas even like happen from other movies, non like sci-fi and fantasy movies. But I think with sci-fi and fantasy, it's more it's just more about that, and I think it speaks to people a lot more than in a regular movie, because like regular movies, they don't really do that. Like they don't really give you these esoteric, these philosophical ideas. regular movies, like, for example, action movies, right? What's to be learned from action movies? Well, it's like the thing about action movies is like it portrays the world as it is. But with sci-fi and fantasy, it portrays the world different than what it is. And so what's the same, what's different is what, is the fact that it's got these different, like maybe the time, the space, maybe there's magic involved and whatever. But when you're watching like a fiction movie, like a regular, like an action movie or a spy movie, like, I mean, unless it's like James Bond, where it's like, or, even a superhero movie, the world is as it is, and people recognize it as it is. People are like, oh, that's just the world. If it's a spy movie, it's just spies and like conspiracies and whatever. Oh, that's just the world. But when it's a fantasy movie and the science fiction movie, they're like, well, it's like, well, this is a different world. And so what's different about it is the story, but what's the same about it is the meaning. That doesn't change. So the meaning comes out, well, the story is the same. And it just portrays the world in a different way. And because it's fantasy and sci-fi, it just invents different things, ideas, and things that are in those movies that people are like, wow, it would be so cool to have that in real life. It would be so cool to have that idea or that thing that's in that movie or that idea or something that I got from that movie in real life. That would be awesome, right? And so people start thinking about it and start working on it. Like, yeah, we could do this. This can work out. We can actually have this thing that started in some fantasy or sci-fi movie, right? So there you go. So there's that. So thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video. Give it a like and a subscribe if you want, and I'll see you guys in another video. Take care and later.